Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to bring to you live optimizing Procure to Pay, a roadmap to your Procure to Pay success. But before we get started into that, let's just take a moment for some introductions. My name is Stephanie Marquez. I'm a principal supply chain consultant here at RPI. I've been with RPI just about 5 years, and prior to my consulting journey, I worked in the functional space. And I'm really excited. Dan asked me to be here today. So thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited you could join me today, Stephanie. My name is Dan Farruggio, and I am the manager of our supply chain team here at RPI Consultants. And I've had the privilege of navigating this ever evolving landscape of supply management with such an amazing team here at RPI since 2011. And when I'm not immersed in work in the world of supply management, you could find me here down in Southwest Florida, spending some time with my amazing wife and 3 kids. And
Awesome.
today, we are very excited to share some insights and strategies that will help you get the most out of a procure to pay assessment. So, some of the things we're going to be covering today is just a general procure to pay overview, why and when it might be a good time to assess. We'll cover a sample approach of how we would approach a procure to pay assessment, some things you could do to plan and prepare for your assessment to help get the most out of it. A couple tips to look for or consider when you're searching for a consulting partner. We'll share a couple lessons learned that we've gained over the years with experience, and then we'll wrap up with some ways that you can implement some continuous improvement policies and procedures.
All right, let's dive right into it. Let's take a look at what our procure to pay overview might look like. So, just kind of a generalized statement, we understand that procure to pay cycles have a variety of different complexities to them, and there's going to be variations between the clients that we work with as well as the industries. So, just kind of starting at the top, right, our procure to pay cycle starts off with an end user or a department that has identified a need typically for a good or service. Generally speaking, that's followed up by a purchase request or a requisition that typically will flow through some level of approvals for their department manager or a supervisor to approve that purchase. There may be some elements of sourcing or vendor sourcing and vendor contracts associated with your procure to pay cycle, ultimately resulting in a purchase order that we're sending out to that vendor. Once that vendor receives that purchase order, they're going to eventually get us our goods or provide us with that service. And there may be a purchase order receipt associated with your process. Ultimately, then there's that transition from your supply management team to your AP financial team, where they're monitoring and entering invoices. Those invoices may have to go through approvals. Then there's a match process, and ultimately, we want to get our vendors paid. But for just some examples in those complexities and variations, we often work with different clients and industries that have maybe multiple layers of approvals. So in our example, we've got two. We have an approval at the requisition or an approval at the invoice level, but there may also be an approval at the purchase order level. So again, just kind of emphasizing that there are specific nuances to the procure to pay cycle.
Right. And when we think of procure to pay, a lot of times we we think of those main process pillars, right? The purchase request, the sourcing, the purchase order, the receiving side, and then the invoice processes and ultimately the payment. Right. And you might be thinking, why are we covering this when everyone here probably has a good understanding of their procure to pay process? Well, see here, there's a lot of complexities that are below the surface. There's some sub processes that can be easily overlooked, and they're all equally as important in the efficiency and overall process of procure to pay. So you might have gone through um, a smaller um, process where you've tweaked some certain areas where there was a need that it presented itself. Maybe you had some hangups on the approval side, or contracts were expiring. So you address a specific need, but all of those small processes and sub processes underneath this involve multiple people from different departments. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And if you're not holistically addressing your procure to pay process, you might be leaving some opportunities on the table to gain some efficiencies and improve cash flow or your profit margins on certain items. So it's important to think, when was the last time that you did dive into your entire procure to pay process and look at it holistically? Small changes in a process or policy, they do add up over time in terms of cost savings and resource availability. So now Stephanie is going to talk a little bit now some of those benefits and value propositions of going through a procure to pay assessment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you can ask yourself, why an efficient procure to pay process? Why is that important? And Dan, you mentioned one, cost reductions and efficiency improvements, right? So we know that there's some benefits that you should expect to realize or try and solve for. And essentially, our end user experiences is very valuable, right? Our landscape looks a little bit different. We have remote work, we have on-site work, so there's some variations that kind of go into play when we are going through an assessment for optimization. So if I'm an organization and these are the goals that we're looking to achieve and or improve, right? I could be looking into how to do some things. When is a good time for that procure to pay process? Those might be questions you ask yourself. And I think as a leader of a supply chain or even finance area, because there's some, collaboration there, listen to your employees. You're going to hear from employees and they're going to vocalize when they're being challenged in a process. We hear that oftentimes a lot when we're doing these types of assessments where folks are talking about, oh, yeah, this is such a manual process and I have to do all of this paper. And those things are common knowledge throughout the organization. You might be able to see that you have some inefficiencies if vendors are putting you on credit hold, right? That's an indication that there's delay in getting them payment. And definitely you're going to be able to see the detail in the data, right? Data doesn't essentially lie. So you'll be able to see if there are late payments to those vendors. You can track your off contract spend and say, well, why? We have a contract in place for these goods or services. Why are we not referencing that contract within our purchases? There may be large R&I or receive not invoice accruals. Why is that happening? All of these are indicators that there might be a larger problem at hand within your procure to pay process. And definitely lack of visibility, whether that be with your contract expirations, auto renewals, you don't necessarily have the foresight of what's coming. So there's a lot of different things that can be indicators, right, that it's time to review your procure to pay process.
And so all of these potential benefits sound amazing and really exciting. So how might you recommend measuring some of these improvements compared to our current status or any kind of benchmarks?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And so we'll talk a little bit later about how sometimes it takes time to see these improvements. But when we look at something like going on hold with a vendor, if we're able to realize over time that we've made an improvement to our process and we're paying our vendors quicker, we are going to have some increased, maybe improved cash flow management. If there's a breakdown in our procure to pay process around approvals, right? And there's delays in getting those requisitions and POs out the door or having that invoice approved. We're going to have some faster decision making. So you're going to be able to see the improvements at those junctures within the process, typically where there's a handoff to somebody else, as well as, the financial cost benefits to it also. So I think now, we've kind of outlined some of the benefits and value proposition, but how do you know when is a good time to assess your procure to pay process?
And that's a great question. So why now, or when is it a good time to potentially assess your procure to pay processes? So besides a specific need or requirement dictating the necessity to assess your processes, there's some other factors and conditions that could show signs that it would be a good time to assess and optimize your P2P process. And some of those are with current market trends and dynamics. So there's constantly being advances and updates to technology with OCR and AI and reporting. So what is it? You know, do you have these tools available to you? Do you have a short term, a midterm, a long term plan to implement and expand these tools, the usage of these tools in your organization? So taking a look at what's available to you, what you own, and how you could benefit and leverage those. Are there any type of regulatory changes, whether that's with W-9 vendors or diversity requirements for and other reporting requirements that have changed? Um, is there any economic condition? Currently, we're in a period of inflation where the cost of goods is a little bit higher. It's taking longer to get to, uh, taking longer to get supplies, and we're making smaller profit margins at these large organizations. So we're seeing and we're hearing more stresses to find methods of cost savings in other areas. So your procure to pay process is rich in opportunity to try and regain some of that profitability. Another condition or market, something that's happening in the market that we're seeing is, the workforce environment. We have hybrid staff. Some are on site, some are working remotely. That plays into employee satisfaction. Stephanie mentioned earlier, listening to your employees. You're going to hear the story through them, through the water cooler type of talk, where the issues are. And then if you're in a growth or a merger and acquisition type of mode, then centralization is part of it. So what might be plans for integrating resources? And then if you're meeting together as an organization for setting future goals and objectives, do you have any lean initiatives, or you're looking to acquire or grow? You have paperless or green or paperless initiatives, or are you looking to make more um, supported decisions using data-driven decision making? These are all objectives that you could really be supported by your procure to pay process.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different areas that can be used to identify when is that perfect time. So we've kind of taken a look at that. We've decided that it's now a good time to assess. Dan, what does an assessment process look like? And is there any recommendation that you would have for folks to kind of outline an approach that might help them in planning and preparing for that assessment?
Sure. It's a great question. So our typical approach for us, um, how we'd approach a procure to pay assessment is something that looks similar to this. Uh, Typically it's about a 12-week engagement. Obviously that could change depending on the size and complexity of your organization. But we would start with an initiate and plan phase where we get everyone aligned, set expectations of making sure everyone knows what's to come, what's expected of each other on the consulting side and on the customer side. And then we move into some scheduling, right? We want to schedule time to get on site, interviews your subject matter experts and stakeholders, and really shadow and understand the ins and outs of your processes. Ask a lot of questions, know what, not necessarily everything that's working, um, that's not working, but what's also working well. So we have that kickoff presentation, again, setting expectations, knowing what's to come so everyone is prepared and on the same page. Then going really into the heart of the assessment of those on-site interviews and shadowing with the different departments that make up your procure to pay process. And then we do a lot of data analysis and review of your current system setup. The, you get a lot of good information from the data, right? And then once we compile all of our analysis and recommendations, we deliver those to the team we were working with, the stakeholders and the subject matter experts. And at that point, we move into the align phase where we work together to align those recommendations to help prioritize them in a realistic, achievable roadmap that makes sense and aligns with your core objectives and goals. And once we have a solid roadmap and there's some consensus on that, we move into the final stage of the project of enablement. And here is where we take all of our findings and prioritize recommendations, and we give an executive presentation on our findings and a path forward. After that, we work together, we really collaborate and define that action plan for next steps, to schedule meetings and follow-ups, and ultimately to facilitate those improvements that we've discussed during the assessment process.
Yep.
Yeah, so Stephanie, in a perfect world, how would you plan or prepare to get the most out of your assessment if you're on the customer side?
Oh, perfect world. I think there's a couple of different factors that kind of go into play. And you mentioned some of them when you were going through the approach, really in that initiate and plan process is how we're determining how we can get the best from our assessment, right? So alignment, strategic alignment, number one. What's the overall goals and vision and the objective of the organization? It's very important that leadership's goals and objectives also align with those of the subject matter experts, because those are the folks that we're going to be sitting with, doing our discovery with. There definitely needs to be a level of mutual understanding of current or future projects and initiatives that the client may have to work on, because that could essentially affect the timeline of what your assessment could look like. And then the sooner that we know about any conditions or constraints, the better we can plan. So we know that some constraints that are pretty common are resource allocation. It can be very difficult to get time on folks' schedules. People have competing priorities, and then everyone has their day job to do as well. But if we know about those up front, again, we just can plan better, and make sure that we're aligned on the consultant side along with our clients and customers. It's definitely important to understand what's our overall desired outcome. So it's not enough just to participate in and conduct the assessment. What are things going to look like past that, right? There's this kind of continuation and focus on the future. What does that look like? And how can we talk that through with our clients? How and when can we address those assessment recommendations? So we may have an opportunity to present 10 to 15 different recommendations. You mentioned outlining a roadmap with realistic, goals, but we don't want to lose momentum. We want to make sure that we understand when those areas of opportunity can kind of be put into action or put into play. And what is the organization or the clients committed to improving? That's where that prioritization comes into play. So you have to know, where am I going to get the most quote bang for my buck in this process? What process is maybe hurting the most, where I can get the most increased efficiency? Do I want to focus my energy and effort there, or do I maybe want to knock off some of this low hanging fruit or quick wins and then focus on the more detailed or complex areas of improvement? And then definitely having an understanding of what tools and technology are available. It's helpful for us if we understand that as consultants going into an assessment, just getting an overall inventory of what tools may be available, what we'll have access to. The more information we can get, the better, because a lot of times the outcomes of these assessments or the recommendations can essentially have a component of technology or integration that's associated with that. So we need to make sure that we have a pretty clear understanding of that. And then we said this once, we'll probably say it again, but expectation setting is huge. It's significant both for the consultant as well as the customer and the client in just developing that partnership. So addressing an assessment with the mindset of, we're on the same team, we're here to help, but we need each other for success. I need to know what you're doing as part of your process, and then I need to be able to communicate that I understand that. So again, this is a collaborative experience. It can't work if it's just one-sided, because we don't know what we don't know. And as those subject matter experts, the customers and clients, they really are the holders of all of the knowledge. Whether you're a client or a consultant, asking for a list of questions that'll be asked to review ahead of time is really important. It helps people to plan. They know what to expect when they're going into maybe a discovery or collaborative session with their partner, and then asking to if there's anything that they can do to prepare ahead of time. Certainly, ask about making connections with similar organizations. Again, you don't know what you don't know. And oftentimes, a lot of people have experienced similar types of pain points or heartburns, or they're doing something that you want to do as part of your future state or part of your assessment. And so you'd like some feedback. And I mentioned this earlier, results take time. So understanding that as part of the expectation is helpful. We all are in this world of instant gratification, but we know that sometimes it may take a few pay cycles for us to see the improvement in our invoice payment process. But incremental improvements are also important. So starting small, right? Like, can we help tackle some of those quick wins? And that way you can realize an improvement almost immediately. And I think
Uh,
something else that needs to be said is, processes and workflows that we discover through our conversation with clients that work well, we want to notate those. In addition to those that need improvement, it's important to emphasize what's happening and what's going well within your organization. And then if your organization has training materials or a library of information, job aids, process documentations that you use internally, maybe as part of your training process or onboarding. But if your consultant partner can get those ahead of time, that could help us to identify maybe a breakdown in process before we even have a conversation. So those types of pieces of information are helpful to share, and also just again level setting and maintaining those expectations throughout the duration. So I know that was a lot. We've covered a lot in how to outline an approach to an assessment, how to get the most out of the assessment. And now, Dan, I'm interested in what are some things that you might recommend to folks who are looking for or things to look for when they're selecting a consulting partner for a project such as this?
Right. So you've identified a need or an opportunity for improvement in your procure-to-pay process, and now you're looking to a partner to help you with that and guide you along that process. So what are some things that you could look for and consider when you're choosing an assessment or a consulting partner? So one first and foremost, one of the things you want to ask about is their experience with organizations of similar size and structure. Are they familiar with your type of business? Do they have they done this before in the same industry or with other similar clients? Are they is the resources that you're going to be working with, are they W-2 employees, or are they subcontracted? Do have they or if they are a subcontractor, have they worked with that consulting team before? Do they vouch for their quality of work? Um, are you going to have the same resource from the kickoff to the delivery of recommendations and then potentially through the enablement piece, on the follow-ups? Those are all very important to the efficiency of your optimization projects and initiatives. And then are you having productive discussions before, during, and after the assessment? So a good consulting partner will make sure that there's a clear understanding of any and all deliverables. What are the expectations of the customer, are clearly outlined and identified, and what the customer's expectations are of the consultant team should also be mentioned and discussed very early on. So something else that you should a good consulting partner will do is help you prepare. They'll send agendas ahead of meetings, making sure that you're ready to talk about the topics that need to be discussed and addressed and dug into. They will follow up on post assessment actions and uh, they're committed to your education and empowerment of your employees and resources while they're on site. Will they be having, are they allowed to answer questions about other processes, whatever it may be? You should be able to squeeze some additional value add while on site for some quick knowledge transfer or quick wins or any kind of on the fly type of training. Those are kind of unrealized or realized value adds when having a consultant team on site. So those are just some things that are helpful and beneficial to look for and ask about when you are searching for a partner for a P2P assessment. And over the years, we've definitely learned a thing or two when it comes to assessments, and we'd like to share a few tips to avoid those should have, could haves, would haves. All right, so most of the problems that we've ever encountered or have bubbled up probably could have been avoided by being more proactive or communicating, having better communication. So making sure again that everyone is clear on expectations. You're starting to see that expectation setting is a very important part of this. What's expected of me and what can I expect from our consulting partner. And then what are some of those warning signs that there could be trouble in paradise? These are some of the things that you should look out for and some tips for the possible course correction.
Yeah, exactly. Trouble in paradise, right? So, like, if you're a consultant and you're engaged with a client, how is that client's engagement? Maybe they uh, are disinterested, or maybe they don't quite understand why they've been asked to sit and meet with you for 2 hours during a discovery session. That can just be an indication of a misalignment in expectations, and expectations is kind of a trend that we've been discussing throughout. But if I'm a consultant, or if I'm sorry, if I'm a customer, how long is it taking my consultant to follow up with me? I've asked a question. Is it 3, 4, 5 days before I hear back on something that's I assume or interpret to be pretty straightforward? Those can also be, just a warning sign that availability is taxed, or maybe there's just a misunderstanding from the consultant's point of view about the level of urgency. Um, you know, Unrealistic expectations from the customer side. As consultants, we want to help and we want to make things better, but it's also important for us to identify and communicate to our clients that, hey, we hear this, we identify this need, but it's going to take some time, and it's up to us to communicate that. When we don't, or if we don't, then there becomes this unrealistic expectation of, well, I just assumed that that was a quick fix, or your consultant is promises of delivery, or everything is easy. And there's this phrase that I like to remember when I'm doing these types of engagements or just projects in general, right? We never want to overpromise. We always want to over deliver, because when you overpromise and you promise people the world, you're going to set them up and yourself up for failure and or disappointment. So it's a fine line. It's okay to say, hey, that's kind of complex. I think we can do it, but that requires a little bit more investigating or research. And again, expectations, communication, huge. But a way into course correct, right, is understanding. We talked about this, or I mentioned it earlier. This can't happen if we're not on the same team. You can't get an effective assessment if you're not working together. So, course correcting is just resetting and understanding that collaborative effort and open communication. And it's also okay to offer alternate solutions. So, for example, if a customer's perception is my consultant is lacking in follow up, don't be afraid to say that or escalate that appropriately to the project manager internally at your organization, or from your partner's organization, right? You want to escalate that. You want to bring that to their attention. They may have missed the email. It could be very an innocent oversight. But also too, from the customer's perspective, again, we're here to help. We understand that when we're doing these types of assessments, identifying weak points in a process can sometimes make you feel a little bit defensive, or you've inherited a bad process. And so we want to work together to make it better. So there's a lot of different things that come into play. And, the goal of a procure to pay is for that continuous improvement, for that betterment of the future. The work just doesn't stop when we conduct the assessment and present our findings and recommendations, but we want to keep that momentum going. So, how can we keep that momentum going? I think is really, the last bit of the question there.
Right. Well said. So, yeah, there's that continuous improvement, and how do we capitalize on the momentum that we've gained throughout this process, right? So, what are some things we could do to plan for the next phase of this engagement in the roadmap in our roadmap initiatives? So, up to this point, we've uh, gone through the written assessment. We've documented our top recommendations and quick wins, and that details the enhancements or improvements or any kind of knowledge that we've shared and implemented that provides immediate value. And then we've prioritized the roadmap. We've worked together with your stakeholders and have good consensus and buy-in on a path forward. It makes sense for your organization and any other objectives and initiatives that you have going on. Then after the executive presentation, where those findings are presented and we have that roadmap uh, proposed, we move into those next steps. So it's uh, what are we doing to put that plan into motion? Uh, we want to conclude that executive presentation with a follow up of, hey, let's check in a week or two or a couple weeks to start talking about scheduling follow up meetings and how we could continue to have a partnership to facilitate those improvements. And we've gained a lot of knowledge going through this process together, and now it's a great time to continue to capitalize on that, right? So is making sure that we don't just end with a nice document of things that could help or that will help. Is now it's a matter of actually implementing those to facilitate facilitate those improvements and realize those benefits.
Yeah, exactly.
So like Stephanie said, the work doesn't end at the conclusion of the assessment. It's just really important to address those next steps and have plans for follow-up and continuous improvement. So
All
with
right.
that, we'll open it up for some questions.
Let's see. I've got a couple here. I think we may have addressed this or you may have mentioned it, but question being, how long does a procure to pay assessment take from like beginning to end of that process?
Yeah, it's a good baseline from uh, sign, execution of the agreement to delivery of the recommendations is about 12 weeks. And obviously, we would work to meet your timeline needs, and depending on the complexities and the size of your organization, it could be longer, it could be shorter. So, but 12 weeks is probably a good baseline for a
Okay.
typical timeline.
Um, Another question here is kind of along the lines of cost savings or in way of vendors and early payment discounts. So how can we help to know, or how can we identify if vendors that we're working with offer early pay discounts to help us realize those cost savings for our organization?
All right, so if there's any kind of payment discounts available, should be communicated with the vendor, and a lot of times they're listed on the invoice itself. So it's making sure that we're paying attention to those, and if there is a discount available, what are we doing to capitalize on that and realize that discount? You could always again call and reach out to the vendors to see if they offer that, but they should be listed on the invoice, and they also have to be set up in the system and assigned to that vendor as well.
Awesome. I don't see any questions at the moment, but I would offer and invite anybody attending that if you think of something after the fact certainly feel free to reach out to us at questions@rpic.com. And I know that folks can then send that information along to Dan and myself to help you get those questions answered. We very much appreciate you spending some time with us today. There's just a lot of exciting things that can happen as a result of an assessment. So if you have any questions, again, about what that might look like, certainly feel free to reach out to us, give us a call. We'll be at the future GHX Summit that's coming up. We will also be at Infor Connect in about a month or so. So there's some areas of opportunity to connect with us in person. We always have upcoming webinars that we publish to share information. We like to let you know what we know. And definitely we conduct boot camps. So there's lots of information that you could find or get access to, whether it be through our LinkedIn page, our website, or just reaching out to questions@rpic.com. So Dan, thank you for asking me to participate in this with you today. It was really fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining. I had a great time, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.